Alaska and Corla, and I have to say that the extent of biodiversity loss and our declaration of a climate change and the children on our streets imploring us to do something about climate change, the future of those children we have compromised. I think we're beyond heckling from the corner or any corner of this chamber, and it's time to lead, it's time to recognise, and it's time to stop the divide and conquer. I represent a city and I also represent a rural area, and have spoken repeatedly on the importance of balanced regional development. And I'm going to speak very strongly now in relation to this with absolutely no apologies. I welcome the Minister's speech, and I welcome the fact that she set out some of the positive initiatives. However, on page 5, Minister, you say we have made meaningful progress and this needs to be recognised. Yes, of course it does. But however, if you look at your first sentence, we are losing biodiversity around the globe at a rate unprecedented in human history, then we need to take unprecedented action. I've spoken on climate change since the day I was elected and came forward, and I looked at copies of various speeches, and I spoke on climate change and the loss of biodiversity on the 4th of May 2016, shortly after I was elected, and continue to do so January 17, April 19, more recently the 9th of May, and I'm only picking out some of them. And back on the 4th of May 2016, I referred to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, along with 195 other countries, known as the Rio Convention, which was held back in 1992. That's 27 years ago. And we worked forward, and we had the Paris Agreement with its binding obligations, and the various reports and the legislation that we've introduced, and all of the while the crisis has deepened. We are now in receipt of a report which is under discussion here tonight, the most comprehensive report on the issue ever completed, compiled by 145 expert authors from 50 countries over 3 years, with inputs from a further 310 contributing authors. I'm not one to quote a priest very often in this chamber, but I certainly agree with Father Enda McDonough when he said we should have a requiem for the loss of the animal species. The report, and I've read the summary, and the summary has been published and the full report hasn't. So I would ask those sceptical voices in here to read it and come back to me perhaps and tell me what they disagree with. There's a 39-page summary report, and the full report has yet to be published. It finds that approximately 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades, more than ever before in human history because of human activities. The average abundance of native species in most major land-based habitats has fallen by at least 20%. More than 40% of amphibian species, almost 33% of reef-forming corals, and more than a third of all marine mammals are threatened. Without drastic action to conserve habitats, the rate of species extinction, already 10 to hundreds of times higher than the average across the past 10 million years, will only increase. According to the report, agricultural activities have had the largest impact on ecosystems that people depend on for food, clean water, and a stable climate. The loss of species and habitats poses as much a danger to life on Earth as does climate change. I could go on, but I think we owe it to the children who have gone out on the streets in this country and throughout the world to show them leadership and hope. And there is hope. There is hope. But we must take the action to make sure. The report specifically says that the biodiversity crisis can be reversed, but doing so will require proactive environmental policies, the sustainable production of food and other resources, and a concerted effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It says, without transformative changes to the world's economic, social and political systems to address the crisis, the panel projects that major biodiversity losses will continue to 2050 and beyond. We are eroding the very foundations of our economies, our livelihoods, food security, health and the quality of life worldwide. That has been reiterated by Social Justice Ireland. It's been reiterated by Enda McDonough, who I already quoted, and by many, many organisations on the ground. They refer also to the policy incoherence, and I've used the expression cognitive dissonance in this chamber before, and I use it again, because on the one hand we have declared a climate emergency, and we're one of 2 countries to declare such an emergency, and we're also one of 2 countries, just one of 2 countries, that will fail to meet our targets. So the serious, if that's a word, cognitive dissonance going on here. There's also policy incoherence in pursuing policies such as Food Harvest 2020 and Foodwise 2025 and the increase in emissions that this will yield. There's also a policy incoherence in continuing down the road of fossil fuels and issuing more licence for gas development. And we have to deal with that policy incoherence if we're seriously interested in dealing with biodiversity loss. In Galway City, we have no biodiversity officer. We talk about the importance of maintaining biodiversity, and we have biodiversity plans, but we have absolutely nobody to implement them. When we look at this report and we look at our response to it, I think, Minister, and I know you're very well intentioned, I don't think your response is strong enough. You have quoted some of it, a few lines, but I think if you read through the report, you will realise that we have to take the most serious and immediate action in relation to the loss of biodiversity. We have to do it not just for the planet, not just because it's the right thing to do, but we also have to do it because economically it's the best thing to do. I quoted a speech I made back on the 4th of May 2016, and I quoted Naomi Klein at the time, and I think to much amusement. And I'm going to repeat it tonight because it echoes what is said in the report that has just been published. Naomi Klein said, "If we stay on the road we're on, we face radical changes to our physical world. We are talking about allowing sea levels to rise in the name of protecting an economic system that is failing the vast majority of the people on this planet, with or without climate change, global warming and the loss of biodiversity." That warning was echoed in less dramatic language by the Governor of the Central Bank. In February of this year, he warned, "If the pace of transition to a low-carbon economy is too slow, a sharper adjustment will be ultimately required, posing macroeconomic and financial stability risks." So, Minister, on every single level we have been warned, and yet we're persisting, as I said, with incoherent policies or contradictory policies. And so we've a plan called, as you well know, 2040. With lots of beautiful language in it about sustainable development. And yet, if you look at the detail of it, it's talking about more and more roads, which goes diametrically against what the People's Assembly, the Citizens' Assembly called for. It called for a reversal or a better proportion of investment in relation to public transport and not roads. And we're going down that. I'll give the specific example of Galway. A proposed ring road of something between 16 and 18 kilometres, at 30-something million per kilometre. Again, it's worth repeating because it must be the most expensive piece of road anywhere in the world. 30-something million per kilometre for a ring road that will serve to extend linear development and entirely out of sync with the your plans that further development in the cities will be within the footprint of the city, and so on. My time is up, and I'll finish on time, but I would appeal to you, Minister, as somebody whose heart is in the right place, who has given a list of all the positive things tonight, to go back and reflect and look at those in the context of the unprecedented loss of biodiversity and the unprecedented action that's necessary.